The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Jnana Yoga, Chapter 13, The Atman, Part 1. Many of you have read Max Muller's celebrated book, Three Lectures on the Vedanta Philosophy. And some of you may perhaps have read in German Professor Deusen's book on the same philosophy. In what is being written and taught in the West about religious thought in India, one school of Indian thought is principally represented, that which is called Advaitism, the monistic side of Indian religion. And some of it is thought that all the teachings of the Vedas are comprised in that one system of philosophy. There are, however, various phases of Indian thought, and perhaps this non-dualistic form is in the minority as compared with the other phases. From the most ancient times, there have been various sects throughout India, and as there never was formulated or recognized church or any body of men to designate the doctrines which should be believed by each school, people were free to choose their own form, make their own philosophy, and establish their own sects. We therefore find that from the most ancient times, India was full of religious sects. At the present time, I do not know how many hundreds of sects we have in India, and several fresh ones come into existence every year. It seems that the religious activity of that nation is simply inexhaustible. Of these various sects in the first place, there can be made two main divisions, the orthodox and the unorthodox. Those that believe in the Hindu scriptures, the Vedas, as eternal revelations of truth are called orthodox. And those that stand on the other authorities rejecting the Vedas are called the heterodox in India. The chief modern unorthodox Hindu sects are the Jains and the Buddhists. Among the orthodox, some declared that the scriptures are of much higher authority than reason. Others again say that only that portion of the scriptures which is rational should be taken and the rest rejected. Of these three orthodox divisions, the Sankhyas, the Nyayakyas, and the Mimamsakas, the former two, although they existed as philosophical schools, failed to form any sect. The one sect that now really covers India is that of the later Mimamsakas or the Vedantists. Their philosophy is called Vedantism. All the schools of Hindu philosophy start from the Vedanta or Upanishads, but the monaistics took the name to themselves as a speciality because they wanted to base the whole of their theology and philosophy upon the Vedanta and nothing else. In the course of the time, the Vedanta prevailed, and the various sects of India that now exist can be referred to one or other of its schools. Yet these schools are not unanimous in their opinions. We find that there are three principal variations among the Vedantists. On one point, they all agree, and that is that they all believe in the God. All these Vedantists also believe in the Vedas to be the revealed word of God. Not exactly in the same sense, perhaps, as the Christians or the Mohammedans believe, but in a very peculiar sense. Their idea is that the Vedas are an expression of the knowledge of God, and as God is eternal, His knowledge is eternal with him, and so are the Vedas eternal. There is another common ground of belief, that of creation in cycles, that the whole of creation appears and disappears, that it is projected and becomes grosser and grosser, and at the end of an incalculable period of time, it becomes finer and finer when it dissolves and subsides, and then comes a period of rest. Again, it begins to appear and goes through the same process. They postulate the existence of a material which they call Aksha, which is something like the ether of the scientists, and a power which they call Prana. About this Prana, they declare that by its vibration, the universe is produced. When a cycle ends, all this manifestation of nature becomes finer and finer and dissolves into that Aksha, which cannot be seen or felt, yet out of which everything is manufactured. All the forces that we see in nature, such as gravitation, attraction and repulsion, or as thought, feeling and nervous motion, all these various forces resolve into that prana, and that vibration of the prana ceases. In that state it remains until the beginning of the next cycle. Prana then begins to vibrate, and that vibration acts upon the aksh, and all these forms are thrown into regular succession. The first school I will tell you about is styled the dualistic school. The dualists believe that God, who is the creator of the universe and its ruler, is eternally separate from nature, eternally separate from the human soul. God is eternal, nature is eternal, so are the souls. Nature and the souls become manifested and change, but God remains the same. According to the dualists, again, this God is personal in that he has qualities. Not that he has a body, he has human attributes. He is merciful, he is just, he is powerful, he is almighty. He can be approached, he can be prayed to, he can be loved, he loves in return, and so forth. In other words, he is a human God, only infinitely greater than man, and he has none of the evil qualities which men have. He is the repository of an infinite number of blessed qualities. That is their definition. He cannot create without materials, and nature is the material out of which he creates the whole universe. There are some non-Vedantic dualists called the atomists who believe that nature is nothing but an infinite number of atoms, and God's will acting upon these atoms creates. The Vedantists deny the atomic theory. They say that it is perfectly illogical. The indivisible atoms are like geometrical points without parts of magnitude, but sometimes without parts of magnitude, if multiplied an infinite number of times, will remain the same. Anything that has no parts will never make something that has parts. Any number of zeros added together will not make one single whole number. So also, if these atoms are such that they have no parts or magnitude, the creation of the universe is simply impossible out of such atoms. Therefore, according to the Vedantic dualists, there is what they call indiscrete or undifferentiated nature, and out of that God creates the universe. The vast mass of the Indian people are dualists. Human nature ordinarily cannot conceive of anything higher. We find that 90% of the population of the earth who believe in any religion are dualists. All the religions of Europe and Western Asia are dualists. They have to be. The ordinary man cannot think of anything which is not concrete. He naturally likes to cling to that which his intellect can grasp. That is to say, he can only conceive of higher spiritual ideas by bringing them down to his own level. He can only grasp abstract thoughts by making them concrete. This is the religion of the masses all over the world. They believe in a God who is entirely separate from them, a great king, a high mighty monarch as it were. At the same time, they make him purer than the monarchs of the earth. They give him all the good qualities and remove all the evil qualities from him, as if it were ever possible for good to exist without evil, as if there could be any conception of light without a conception of darkness. With all dualistic theories, the first difficulty is how is it possible that under the rule of a just and merciful God, the repository of an infinite number of good qualities, there can be so many evils in this world. This question arose in all dualistic religions, but the Hindus never invented a Satan as an answer to it. The Hindus, with one accord, laid the blame on man, and it was easy for them to do so. Why? Because, as I just have told you right now, they did not believe that the souls were created out of nothing. We see in this life that we can shape and form our future, every one of us, every day. In trying to shape the morrow, today we fix the fate of the morrow. Tomorrow we shall fix the fate of the day after, and so on. It is quite logical that this reasoning can be pushed backward too. If by our own deeds we shape our destiny in the future, why not apply the same rule to the past? If in an infinite chain a certain number of links are alternatively repeated, then if one of these groups of these links can be explained, we can explain the whole chain. So in this infinite length of time, if we can cut off one portion and explain that portion and understand it, then if it be true that nature is uniform, the same explanation must apply to the whole chain of time. If it be true, we are working out our own destiny here within this short space of time. If it be true that everything must have a cause as we see it now, it must also be true that that which we are now is the effect of the whole of our past. Therefore, no other person is necessary to shape the destiny of mankind but man himself. The evils that are in the world are caused by none else but ourselves. We have caused all this evil, and just as we constantly see misery resulting from evil actions, so also we can see that much of the existing misery in the world is the effect of the past wickedness of man. Man alone, therefore, according to this theory, is responsible. God is not to blame. He is the eternally merciful Father. He is not to blame at all. We reap what we sow. Another peculiar doctrine of the dualist is that every soul must eventually come to salvation. No one will be left out. Through various vicissitudes, through various sufferings and enjoyments, each one of them will come out in the end. Come out of what? The one common idea of all Hindu sects is that all souls have to get out of this universe. Neither the universe which we see and feel, nor even an imaginary one, can be right, the real one, because both are mixed up with good and evil. According to the dualists, there is beyond this universe a place full of happiness and good only, and when that place is reached, there will be no more necessity of being born and reborn, of living and dying, and this idea is very dear to them. No more disease there, no more death. There will be eternal happiness, and they will be in the presence of God for all time and enjoy Him forever. They believe that all beings, from the lowest worm up to the highest angels and gods, will all sooner or later attain to that world where there will be no more misery. But our world will never end. It goes on infinitely, although moving in waves. Although moving in cycles, it never ends. The number of souls that are to be saved, that are to be perfected, is infinite. Some are in plants, some are in lower animals, some are in men, some are in gods, but all of them, even the highest gods, are imperfect and are in bondage. What is the bondage? The necessity of being born and the necessity of dying. Even the highest gods die. What are these gods? They mean certain states, certain offices. For instance, Indra, the king of gods, means a certain office. Some soul which has a very high has gone to fill that post in this cycle, and after this cycle, he will be born again as man and come down to this earth. And the man who is very good in this cycle will go and fill that post in the next cycle. So with all these gods, there are certain offices which have been filled alternatively by millions and millions of souls who, after filling these offices, come down and become men. Those who do good works in this world and help others, but with an eye to reward, hoping to reach heaven or to get the praise of their fellow men, must, when they die, reap the benefit of those good works. They become these gods. But that is not salvation. Salvation will never come through the hope of reward. Whenever man desires, whatever man desires, the Lord gives him. Men desire power, they desire prestige, they desire enjoyments as gods, and they get these desires fulfilled. But no effect of work can be eternal. The effect will be exhausted after a certain length of time. It may be aeons, but after that it will be gone, and these gods must come down again and become men and get another chance for liberation. The lower animals will come up and become men, become gods, perhaps then become men again, or go back to animals, until the time when they get rid of all desire for enjoyment. The thirst for life, this clinging on to the me and mine, this me and mine is the very root of all evil in this world. And if you ask a dualist, is this your child? He will say, it is God's. My property is not mine, it is God's. Everything should be held as God's.